Hey, guess what? It's time to do another video. So people watch me enough, uh probably know I don't do all the people ask to subscribe and hit the bell and all that stuff because people watch enough YouTube videos now to know the protocols. So let's get right into it. I don't have any fancy intros, any music on the line. I don't like sometimes the music or stuff like that in videos can be a little distracting because people listening to the undertone music. So that's why I don't do it. I don't have any fancy intros because it can turn it, whatever. I just have my opinions on that. I might change my opinion later on having an intro video, but I just don't see the need to do it. Um, I like to get into it, right into it. I don't do any editing. The reason why I do my videos and I just go for the punt, the reason why I just go for and make my videos because I want to let you know I'm speaking and thinking as I do it to make it as real as possible. So the topic for this video, um, the topic for this video will be basically what's the most important thing in your studio. And I'm going to, believe it or not, out of everything that people would say what they think is the most important thing in the studio, um, and I'm going to say I have an order of things, but what's the most important thing in the studio? Um, Now, if we exclude the artist, let's take the artist out of the equation. The most important thing in the studio would be you, believe it or not. And what I mean when I say that is this: the more experience and knowledge that you have with the tools that you have, and be able to use the tools you have. I don't care if you have outboard gear like I got behind me, or just a DAW with plugins. If you know what you're doing, you're going to get great results. Period. That's the most important thing. Now, when it comes to equipment, I would say this. What's the most important thing when it comes to equipment in your studio? Believe it or not, it's your computer. Period. I don't care if you have a PC or a Mac, because your computer, PC or Mac, is the most important thing because it's what you're using to record, edit, mix, whatever the case is. The computer. The better the computer, the better everything else works around it. You know, um, from stable hard drives to whatever the case may be. The reason why I'm saying that because of all the equipment that I've had of all the years of me taking the time to buy gear and more gear, more gear, more gear. Believe it or not, the biggest failures I've always had was something failing in the computer, whether it's the power supply or the hard drives. Those seem to be the two most things that fail in these computers, are those two things. The power supply fails or the hard drive fails. Either or, if those fail, session's done. Period. Power supply, you can get enough power supply, but if the hard drive crash, all that stuff is on that hard drive. 9% of the time, it's done. It's hard to recover a failed hard drive. So that's why they tell you a lot of times back your stuff up with a second hard drive, put it in the cloud or whatever. So that would be, to me, in my opinion, of what's the most important thing in your studio. Now, other things. Other than that, let's say you as the experience and knowledge and your computer, what else is important? Definitely the interface. Now, today's interface whether you have a little 2-channel, um, just a little 2-channel interface. I don't care what brand. I don't care what brand. They will 99% be in close to each other that you can't tell the difference because they're just analog to digital and digital to analog converters. They just convert digital, analog to digital. Once something goes digital, digital becomes ones and zeros to a computer. So, like for example, this video that you're watching is being converted back to video in an analog sort of sense. It's actually a bunch of pictures. They're just being recorded at so many frames per second. So when they say frames per second, frame meaning one picture, and when you can do 30 frames or 30 pictures in a second, that's a lot of pictures. So if you imagine, it's like this. This is where you get into bit rate, when you're getting into sampling and so forth. Like the video is processing or sampling so many pictures a second. That's where you get sample rate. So it's kind of like, you ever seen a choppy video? Doing something like that, right? The buffer speed of the memory for the RAM and the processor, the CPU, central processing unit, cannot keep up with the amount of image detail that's coming through the camera lens to be processed for video. It can't keep up, so it becomes choppy. Now, better processor and better and more memory for more storage, other than, because memory is temporary storage and the hard drive it's more permanent storage, right? So things go to memory to only be there for an extremely short amount of time. Goes into your RAM, random access memory. That's why it's memory. It just memorizes for a short amount of time. Then you have, and then of course there's read-only memory. Then there's what we call hard drives, which is permanent memory. But we get into, so the processor, the more it can process all this data being thrown at the CPU is being thrown a lot of data. Like my computer right now, or your computer, not only has to process the video card, has to process the sound card and all the other programs that are running the operating system that's on this computer and everything else. That's why we try to get computers with 16, 32, 64 gigs of RAM, quad core, i7 Intel processors or whatever with, the significant amounts of the chipset, the motherboards itself, and what the motherboards can do. And so I went straight left with this. But so all that's important, because when in today's studio market, we're doing so much with software plug-in versions of hardware gear that would normally be in a rack. There's so much stuff out there in software plug-in form. And that stuff starts to take a toll on, because those plugins are constantly asking for memory and processing because they're doing it every time the music or whatever. But what I was saying, going back to the ones and zeros and analog, and why they always talk about really great analog to digital versus digital to analog, and why is that so important when it comes to the interface, is because the interface, the more it can process how the quality of the recording or the quality of the recording went into be converted to digital ones and zeros, and how it can convert it back to analog to sound as dynamic, as depth and everything else, that to make it sound whatever it sounds, as true as possible, is the key. And a lot of it has to do with the processing power of the interface and how it's able to process analog to digital and digital back to analog. And that's why a lot of times we'll say, well, some computers, if it can handle the processing, they say, well, we want to sample as much detail of analog as we possibly can. So when it in the computer, when you're working in a computer and it converts it back, it sounds as much detail went in. So when you're coming out of the DAW and everything else, it sounds as good as what we're doing going into. So I would say that would be a good analog, a good interface. Now, today's interface, they were separated. Interfaces were separated by quality and channel count and everything else. That the more expensive high-end interfaces were extremely expensive and out of the range of most people. But in today's society, it's kind of like even with I have a few Behringer interfaces, but I also have an M-Audio, which is an older one. I got some Marketer Unicorn. I can't see them because it's dark under there. I got an Antelope Orion. Some other interfaces. But even with the Behringer interfaces, the converters, a lot of them have this pretty much the same converter processing chipsets in them. That's why Behringers can sound as good as the Audience and the M-Audios and a lot of the other interfaces that we have. So some people would say, okay, well, if the Behringers are as good as, like, say, for example, my Antelope, why don't you use Behringer? The only downside I would say to my Behringer compared to my Antelope is, one, the Antelope, not only can it do USB, it can do MADI, it can do Thunderbolt, and so forth else. Plus, it has its own DSP processing. There's a lot of factors to why the Antelope is a lot way above my Behringers. But it does have an extremely great syncing word clock. So if I want to sync two Antelopes together, I could. But for the most part of everything that I do musically, I don't need no more than 24 channels. So I always dedicate these first set of 24 channels on my console, 1 through 24, as the returns for my Antelope, because that's all I need for the music that I deal with. I don't need all 48 channels. Like some people have 200 tracks in their song, which that still puzzles me. Why someone would have that many tracks? That's a lot, especially if you're doing that in your DAW. Think about every single track you're doing, whether you're using MIDI, virtual instruments, or samples, or just audio recording. You're overworking your CPU. Hardcore. Now, some people say, well, no, I got a Mac with the M2 processing chip, and my CPU is only barely 20%. Well, it takes that to do that many tracks. Most people aren't running a Mac with M2. Half the people that watch my channel run a PC. Now, on a computer, so, let's say you got a powerful gaming, which I would recommend the most powerful PC you can get. But you can do that with a Mac as well. I got a Mac right here. It's an older Mac, but I still got a Mac sitting right here. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about in this video, about what's important in the studio. Now, when I said initially in the beginning of the video, excluding the artist, well, if you have the artist, let's bring back to the artist. Well, if you have an artist that you're working with, if you're not the artist yourself, if you are the artist yourself, once again, when I say you, if you're the artist, you're still you. But if you're working with an artist and let's say you're just a producer, engineer, and everything else, and you're doing everything in your private studio, and you're going to be creating music, and you're going to be mixing and recording music in your studio for this artist, then the artist is the most important thing in that studio. Now, the reason why I say that, because out of everything, it's pointless if you don't have good artists. The whole thing is pointless without good talent. Now, I may be crazy, but I don't know too many people. I don't know too many people that wants to listen to bad talent. I'm talking about bad singers, a rapper that can't flow, a musician that can't play a guitar or keyboards, or a bad musician or whatever. No one wants to listen to that, especially a horrible singer. Who's gonna listen to that? People want to listen to miraculously or great singers, great musicians, great rappers. That's all, that's what draws us into all our favorite artists, male or female. That's why I listen to, me and being R&B, like I got Stevie Wonder. Why I listen, Stevie Wonder, one of the biggest reasons why we know Stevie Wonder is not because he can play the piano blind or the harmonicas, because he's an exceptional singer. That's what puts Stevie Wonder on the map. His skill set to play the piano, it's just like with any other artist. The same thing is like, now, people are going to get mad at me. They might hate on this. Prince was a magnificent performer. He wasn't the best singer. He was a decent singer. It's like with R. Kelly. R. Kelly was a decent singer, but R. Kelly singing wise was not like on the level of like Luther Vandross. Just wasn't. Now, some people are going to, they're always going to be, there's always going to be people out there they're always going to be into what I would say subjective. Because some people think R. Kelly is one of the best R&B singers. So I don't get into debates like that. You like who you like. Now, the last part of this video, what else would be most important in the studio? Well, everything else is a combination of things working together. And I kind of, if you understand, let's say racing engines as an example. I'll throw a racing car engine as an example. I'll throw just a motor. Okay. Let's take a Chevy 350 motor. Bare block, basic engine. And this is if you understand motors. If you don't understand motors and cars, it's perfectly fine. I hope you understand the analogy of what I'm trying to say. You take a bare engine. Let's say it came with the original stock cylinder heads on it. You decided, I'm going to go and put some better cylinder heads. I want the car to perform better. So I'm going to go buy a different set of cylinder heads. And you take the old cylinders heads off and you put the new cylinder heads on there. And the car feels different, a little different. Like, okay, this feels different. But it don't necessarily feel like it's neck snapping powerful like I thought it would. And the reason being, I'll explain why that would be. I don't care who you are. If you don't do this other stuff to the motor, just buying a set of cylinder heads is not going to work. Now, if you're a type of person that says, okay, I take that same 350, but this time I'm going to strip the motor completely down to the bare block, and I'm going to get a better forged crankshaft. I'm going to get chrome moly bearings, Clevite 77 bearings. I'm going to get JE forged pistons. They're a lightweight forged piston. I'm going to run chrome moly rings. They're going to produce great results for help the engine complete or create compression, but they're also, because they're a lot more rigid piston ring, they can reduce piston scavenging and skirting, uh, and wear and tear on the cylinders when the piston's going up and down in the cylinder. On top of that, I'm going to get a better set of Wesco or high performance head gaskets. I'm going to run ARP head bolts, what we call fasteners. I'm going to take them same cylinder heads, but I'm going to take the machine shop to have them machined to open up the ports to sort of air will flow. So I'm going to have them ported and polished. I'm going to get a camshaft that will flow a better lift, a better duration. I'm going to run better push rods, hardened racing push rods. I'm going to run a double roller timing chain. I'm going to stick on a more flowing intake manifold on it. I'm going to run better breathing long, what we call long tube headers instead of the intake manifold, exhaust manifolds. And I'm going to run a better fuel system, whether you're running carburetor or a fuel injection system. I'm going to run big injectors. There's a whole bunch of other factors like a better breathing mass airflow meter, a better calibrated mass meter with the big injectors. I'm going to run a more reactive computer. I'm going to run a better coolant system. I'm going to run a high performance, high torque starter. I'm going to run a better racing flow aluminum radiator with, and I'm going to run a fuel rail system or whatever. I'm going to run whatever. So you can see I'm starting naming all this tons of stuff. Now that 350 motor just went from something that just barely to now it's roasting the tires. The whole car wants to go sideways, but now I got to do more stuff to the car. I got to improve the car suspension. Run a 4-link rear end. I got to run. Now I got to run a roll cage. I got to run a better, more polyurethane bushings. I got to run a better braking system because I got to stop now because I'm making a whole lot more power. So I got to stop. So I got to run a better braking system, bigger disc. I got to run a better ignition system like an MSD system or a crane. You can see that it starts to, as I started naming all this more stuff than just other than just buying a pair of cylinder heads. That's what it's going to take that make that motor scream, right? It's the same thing in the recording studio. Some people will argue, is the mic, or should I get a mic preamp? Should I get a console? Should I get that console? Should I run external mics? Are my preamps in my interface good enough? All of it. A better microphone with a more high quality preamp will make a difference than a cheap microphone on a basic preamp. I kind of use it one more thing if you're into photography as an example as well. Imagine if you like me who wear glasses and I take my glasses and they're dirty on the lenses. You think I'm going to see good? The lens is going to be dirty. I need to clean the lenses really, really good. Right? So once I clean the lenses real good, everything just becomes clear. So now I can see a lot more details with the right corrective lenses. It's the same thing when you have a camera and you have a really great camera body. They always say this in photography. The lenses are actually more important than the camera body. The camera body just provides the functions for the lens to take great pictures. But here's another thing they talk about in photography. They always talk about just the two things, the camera and the lenses. When in actuality, one of the most important things in camera actually is lighting. Because your camera does no good if there's no light. It can't see anything. If it's pitch black or dark, doesn't matter what kind of lens, and then you're sitting there, you're turning the ISO up as much. Now you're getting all this noise, which looks like, they call it noise, which looks like a bunch of unwanted unwanted dotted filtering on the picture that you didn't want there because you turned the ISO all the way up. You turned your aperture all the way down as much as possible, and you slowed your shutter speed as much, probably allow as much light to capture something in the dark, and it's still gonna look dark. This is why cell phones don't make great photography cameras in professional settings. This is the reason why they still use high-end cinema cameras. And they're gonna be there's always someone in the comments. Well, they show that they filmed one film with a DSLR, or they did one show they filmed what's your name with a DSLR on a TV show, whatever. I'm not saying you can't use a DSLR or your cell phone, but your cell phone or that DSLR still needs lighting. They still had lighting to light the subject. And a prime example would be, I got a light over here. Now I'm using my webcam. Now if I turn the light off, the lighting changed as I'm recording this. The lighting changed. Lighting matters. Now all you got is this light from above me shining on down. But there's no what they call front lighting. It's what they call backlighting. The backlighting is everything is still well lit behind me, but I'm not well lit because there's no key lighting. So I'm using this light right here to put key lighting. And this is what they do, what they call backlighting, key lighting, overhead lighting, and so forth. This is why you go into TV settings or movie settings, they have all these different lights. So I got to turn on my key lighting. Now there's lighting. The light on the front of me is lighting my face, so it gives it a better, clear picture of not just me, other than just what you can see behind me, but you can still, I'm a lot more visible in the photo. And this is the things what I'm saying. These are things what I'm saying are important factors. So to sum up the video, if you're going to invest in, like some people, well, I can just use my mic pre in my interface. You can, but there is a reason why, and I'm not saying that the mic pre in your preamp, the mic pre or in your what we call mic pre or preamp, same thing, will not be effective. It will definitely be a lot more effective with a better quality mic than a cheap mic when you're recording through your audio interface using the mic pre's built on. But there's a but there. But if you take that same mic pre and you run it through like my Universal Audio 610 preamp, or my other preamps I got over here, my Avalons or whatever, you're going to hear a difference. It's going to pick up. It's kind of like using a cheap camera body versus a pro camera body. The pictures, because the pro camera can do a lot more to capture a photo. The same thing with the preamp. The preamp can do more to capture what the mic is capturing. And on top of that, the preamps also add certain color to the sound. That's part of the sound. You're not going to get that. Most audio interfaces are very clean sounding. They're very transparent, which means there's no color, which means they sound basic. It's all, and to understand transparent or clean or whatever, it's like think about this. Think of a cake with no icing. Yes, the cake can still taste good and sweet. But what helps the cake is the icing. Think of an external microphone preamp as like a cake with icing. That's the difference. But there's all factors. So some people say, well, you talked about mic and mic pre's. What else? Let me tell you, a lot of stuff helps. The console helps the sound. All the external compressors. Is mine? No. Okay. The external compressors. A lot of factors help big time, and this is why. And I'll say this, and I'll end on this note. Why do you still think and I'm talking about people think commercial studios went out of business because, and I made a video I can't talk. I made a video a while back talking about how DAWs and all that have killed recording studios. Let me clarify this to understand commercial studios that have closed. It's not that the DAWs are necessarily better than an actual commercial studio even if it had a tape machine. It's not that that's better. It's a different way of working, but it's not that is better. What was killing most commercial studios were that the old system of how artists recorded, independents or artists assigned major contracts, they got so much advance money to go to a recording studio to record a project. So most of the recording studios were dependent on charging that kind of money because of the kind of gear, the building, the staff, the assistant engineers, the equipment, everything what it took to record records that way. Even including down to buying 2-inch tapes, which were $200 to $400 a piece. Easy, whether it was Ampex or ATR, and they needed this console because they needed the channel, the channel input because of all the mic pre's on the console, as well as all the outboard gear. So all this factored in, plus the space. Most people were bands at the time, and they needed the space to record bands. Well, as everyone started doing this stuff in their home, most people record 1 track or 2 tracks at a time. That's it. Most people are programming their drums now, and everything else. Or most people are using, like me, I got a couple of MPCs, a Renaissance and a Studio, and they just program drum beats or whatever. Or I use software drums. I use virtual drums, like they're real drum set sounding virtual drums, or whatever the case. But being able to do all this in your DAW, and just instead of having a ton of outboard gear, just plugins. They do the same thing. It's kind of like people well, it's not cost effective because when it breaks, it's us all connected, including the economy. People don't have the income financially to do it the old way anymore. So because of that, some recording studios, instead of saying, well, let's adjust, they want to still keep it the old way. A lot of times, some of these studios just didn't want to change their ways and modernize. And it became their demise. And because they weren't drawing in clients, they were forced to close because they couldn't pay their rent anymore. They couldn't pay their staff. They had to start selling equipment. Now, recording studios are still booked because, like, the people that watch my video, there's only 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 people that watch my video out of the millions on YouTube that watch a ton of other videos. Because they watch a ton of other videos, a lot of people, millions of people never even saw my video or my video channel. So they don't see videos like this. But there are millions of people that still go to commercial studios. Millions, believe it or not. There are, like I said, millions, probably thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that still form groups, bands, or whatever. They still go to commercial studios. So commercial studios, a lot of them are booked. But a lot of studios have closed because they weren't getting high paying clients. They were getting more local independent artists that have a few $1,000s to record and not $100,000 or $1 million budget like they used to do back in the 80s, 90s, or whatever. So that's why they closed. Has nothing to do with the software, because they had to close because of the millions of dollar equipment, and because of the staff they couldn't pay, and because of the rent they couldn't pay, and the maintenance costs they couldn't pay, and everything else, and the maintenance to keep a large format console, because large, like the SSLs have to stay on 24/7, which means require to pay the electricity bills, and because electricity bill is ridiculously high, because you got to run AC to keep the power supplies cooled and everything else. So there's a ton of factors. So in the end, what's important? Everything else is a combination. You need a good microphone, a good preamp, a good interface, acoustic treatment. A lot of that stuff, all of it works together. No one thing is the one thing that you need in your studio, and say, okay, because you've heard it. I've heard it from a lot of people. You know, if I was to buy one thing, that would be a good microphone. A good microphone on crappy equipment is still going to sound crappy because the equipment is crappy. A good microphone on good equipment is going to sound great. But out of that, good microphone on good equipment is pointless if the artist is crappy. It's a combination of all of it. A great artist being recorded through a great microphone on great mic preamps, through great interface, being operated by a skilled knowledge engineer will always produce great results. That's what it takes. So what's important in the studio? Everything else is just options. If you have a great, when I say this, there are options of great artists. There are options of great microphones, options of great mic pre's, external or in the mic or in the interface. There are options of great, whatever the case may be. Everything else is options when it comes to gear. That's why they make so many different companies of so many different types of gear. I don't care if it's compressors, microphone preamps, EQs, whatever. Same thing with plugins. There's so many options. There's Soft Toys, Isotope, UAD, Waves, Acoustica Audio, and the list just goes on and on and on and on. Same thing with, there's so many options of mixing consoles, options of recording, options of monitors. Some people would say, well, what if I was to get anything important in your studio would be your monitors, because no matter what, it doesn't matter if you can't get an accurate picture of what's coming out of the speakers. Once again, all of it's important. Good microphone, good studio monitors, good mics, good microphone preamps, good audio interfaces, acoustic treatment, console or no console, outboard gear, no outboard gear, plugins, or whatever. And whatever choice of DAW you decide to work out of it. All of it needs to work together. It's like I was describing about the car. You can't just put cylinder heads on the car and not do everything else to make the car whatever case. And it's kind of like, and I'll end my note on the car. It's like, let's say you go buy a Hellcat Charger, right? Supercharged 6.2 liter V8, makes 800 plus horsepower. What you don't understand is the engineers at Dodge engineered the braking system, the fuel system, Everything's all in the package. You just may not have thought about it. You just know, all you know is just a Dodge Charger Hellcat. It's the same thing with a Mustang Shelby GT500 or a Camaro ZL1 or a Corvette ZL6. And I can just go on and on and on. If you're into imports or whatever, you know, or if you're into European, like a BMW M3, the engine, the braking, the everything's all engineered to work together. Versus someone who's trying to build something. If you're building something, like you take something that was an old Chevy pickup, and it came with an only 180 horsepower 305 motor in it from the 80s, and you want to make it this 800 horsepower street killer, where you're going to have to do what I talked about when I was talking about building that engine earlier in the video to get it to do that. You got to do all of that. You can't just do one part of it. And if you increase the engine, you got to look at the suspension. You got to look at the braking system, the cooling system. All of it is going to be effective. Not one's going to override the other and cause you to have problems. So it's the same thing with studios. All of it is needed to produce and create great music in your studio. And last fact, everything that you do about your studio, it also depends on the end result. For most artists, it's not the studio. It's performing on stage in front of thousands of people and thousands of their fans. That's the end result. The studio is not the end result for an artist. The studio is just the shop where things are happening. The performing on stage, and touring is an artist's career. People want to know when the next, they don't go and ask artists, when the next time you're going in the studio. They only ask that when they haven't been in the studio create anything new. But once they create new, they don't ask. Once they got new music and they release new music, they don't ask when you go to the studio. They say, hey, when you're going on tour so we can see you perform. That's the end result for an artist. We want to see you perform. So, thanks for watching, and y'all have a great one.